We touched on this earlier, but you know, the general process where they're lining people up from low bids to high, you know, based upon your capacity, and they want to make sure that the eventual contractors can meet beneficiary demand in the area. Well, how do they do that? So CMS has actually put out some detailed information on that. The beneficiary demand is based upon, now this is bid area by bid area, product category by product category, okay? So they're not doing nationals or whatever. So you'll know when you go in to those bid worksheets exactly what these numbers are. It's based on actual historic beneficiary utilization of the lead item in that product category over the previous 2-year period. Plus, they amp it up with the expected growth in the number of beneficiaries that are enrolled in the bid area, as well as the expected growth in utilization of the lead item in the product category in the bid area. So that's the number that you're going to see in there in terms of what is the total anticipated beneficiary demand for the lead item in that product category.
May I offer one quick thing?
You may.
For the Brayson people, you're the exception. They're using 2014, 2015. The spike that was had due to the overseas fraud and whatever threw the numbers so high that it was not appropriate. So there's the exception. So the numbers you'll see are what was paid for by the Medicare fee-for-service system in 4 years ago versus last year.
And CMS touts this as an improvement of the previous programs. They really only included the last year's, so they're using the previous 2 years. So the lead item methodology sort of brings in the beneficiary demand because, as Kim mentioned earlier, that's the thing that CMS is looking at for both the supplier, the bidder capacity, and the beneficiary demand. So this is actually a regurgitation of the previous slide. So the last thing that is important in there is CMS does point out that a certain number of beneficiaries are served by grandfathered patients. That's about 15% of the beneficiaries in each bid, and this is based upon prior bid rounds. They do not minus out that beneficiary demand, that 15%, to account for grandfathered. So CMS they keep sort of touting that they're being generous, essentially, in terms of that beneficiary demand being higher. Now, beneficiary demand and supplier capacity are the two things that have to come together to get the magic number of the group of contractors. How many DME suppliers for that product category in that bid area? So CMS put out about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3, a fact sheet on this. Again, this was significantly more information than we've ever had in the past of how did they evaluate your information. Remember the kind of information you're putting in. You're putting in a lot of detailed financial information, right? Your tax returns and other financial spreadsheets and that sort of thing. But how do they actually figure out, you know, if you're financially sound or not? They give you the ratios, but they don't say what's a pass or what's a fail on those ratios. They went out and they showed how they're doing a multi-step process. And this, again, is much more than they've done in the past in terms of vetting out suppliers. So first of all, they looked, and this is, you know, we've had questions about, well, I'm a small company, but I'm owned by a larger company. Which company should do the bidding? Because of the way this financial analysis is done, my recommendation is that you put your bid in on the more financially sound organization, because this is where that benefit is going to come in. So the first question there up on the top under step 1 is if the financial score meets the threshold to receive a capacity. Okay, so they're going to figure out, like, let me give a sort of basic example. I'm a bidder. Say the 100 is the expected demand over the 3-year period. I say that I can do 30 units, right? 30, that doesn't, say 30% of that. So first of all, nobody's going to get credit for more than 20%. Okay, so they're immediately. And say last year I did 5, okay? And even if my financials are okay, they're not great, but they're not terrible, I don't get kicked out on the financials, they're going to bring my 30 down probably closer to my historical utilization of 5, okay? What they're looking at is to make sure that you are financially capable of doing what you say you can, but they're not going to put you more. They're going to look at your historical capacity as a barometer. Now, if you weren't a contractor in the previous bid program, obviously your capacity is going to be much smaller. But the bid sheet also asks you for your capacity in non-Medicare business, Medicaid, private payer. So you should put that number in realistically. I mean, they don't have a way to verify that, but there's no reason not to be truthful here. You should be truthful in this. So if your financial score meets the threshold to receive capacity beyond your historical amount, CMS will accept that, and if not, or if you're a new supplier, CMS will only accept historical capacity. So what they're saying is, if you say I can do more than I've done in the past, they're only going to give you credit for more if your financials can substantiate that. Now, exactly how they do that, we don't know, but they have numbers that they're using, okay? So they may bring you back to your historical capacity. Step two, and the next bullet there is the 20%. Nobody's going to get more credit than 20%, even if you did more than 20% in the previous year. Yeah.
What if you're in a market where there's not a lot of winners? What if you're in a market where there's not a lot of winners and your capacity was extremely high and you want to lower it?
Well, let me tell you, capacity is only used to determine how many bidders get contracts. It has absolutely nothing to do with how much business you get later on. If you get a contract and you decide not to compete in the marketplace, you may not get any business. But it's really a license. You know, there's no guarantee.
No, but my point is like,
Well,
okay, so if you're in Houston and you're doing almost all the hospital beds because no one else wants to do them and you're losing a bunch of money, what if you want to lower your capacity this go round instead of,
CMS will, if your financials support it, CMS will probably give you your historical capacity, assuming it wasn't above 20%.
So, and Jason, I wanted to add in on this one a little bit too, because in some of our conversations about approaching CMS with recommendations, it was exactly your scenario. So I was a walker provider in CBA because I was the only local guy. And I don't want to do 500 walkers a year anymore. The only way we could even approach that was to say, well, you can't increase my capacity off of what I put on my sheet. In other words, if I only want to do 20, just because I did 200, don't assume I'm going to do 200 in the future. But if we did that, then we're saying, hey, you can manipulate the historical data on this side of the equation, but not on this side of the equation. And it made more sense to say historical capacity and claims data stands on its own.